Okay, listeners, welcome back to a special bonus episode of the Roanoke Presents From Print to Podcast. I sat down with Lee Hunsaker of Hoot Holler fame, our March-April cover star, back in our March episode, and we chatted about so much that we just couldn't fit it all. Much like we can't fit things in print, sometimes you can't fit it all in a podcast segment. So we are really excited to sit back down with you and talk more about Hoot Holler. Thank you again for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
We talked a little bit about Hoot Holler in our segment, but I really want to take a little deeper dive into this because what you're doing as a story midwife is so important. And so if you don't mind just giving a real brief overview for listeners who didn't catch that last segment to what Hoot Holler is, and then we'll dive into a little more detail about that.
Sure, yeah. So Hoot Holler is basically Roanoke's version of the Moth Story Hour. It's live storytelling, kind of rehearsed, but still pretty raw. And our home base is at the Grandin Theater. We invite community members to submit stories, true stories.
That's key, right?
Yeah,
true story.
Absolutely. Based around the published theme. And then if the story is selected, I'll work with each storyteller behind the scenes to get the story, from page to stage, as we say.
I love it.
So,
page to stage. That's
yeah.
brilliant. That should have been my headline. Come on now. Shoot. Well, that's fantastic. And so I love seeing the sold out marquee. That's super exciting every time I see that because you went from, again, we talked about how you went from a writer's group essentially in your living room and now you're on a stage in a packed, full standing room only space. Yes. And people are encouraged to listen and sort of just hear out these amazing stories. And so let's talk about that because we didn't get too much into it in the segment. Yeah. But Hoot Holler, what are some of the themes that you've done in the past that have really resonated?
Oh my gosh, we've done so many fun ones. I mean, we've done everything from bad dates to magic to take this job and shove it. That was a great one. We did one called Duets where we had two people telling the same story.
Oh, that's interesting.
And that was fascinating. We've done Voices of Veterans. We've done coming out stories. We've done My Life in Drag.
And most recently it was Everybody.
Yes, exactly. And that one was geared toward the human body and all the experiences that encompasses, which is
rave
wide.
reviews, by the way. The next day after, it was all I could see on all my social feeds, and everybody was talking about it. My art director, Anna Morales, so she said, and she's an artsy, creative person who's always out. She said it was the best event that she's ever been to in Roanoke.
Wow.
Like how powerful it was, and just hearing those stories from so many individuals, because you're not just asking all women or all men to share a story. You've got a variety, a really diverse cast of people up there sharing their personal stories.
Absolutely. And that's something I, insist on. My goal is to get as wide of a spectrum of experiences as we can.
Right.
For sure.
And so in the last segment, listeners can hear about what inspired you to do this in addition to what we've been told so far. But the evolution of this event has really been something to watch because we talked about you started on the garden lawn at Sweet Donkey Coffee, and now you're on a stage at Grandin Theater to packed house. And now you're going out. You're not even just doing this in Roanoke, but you're experimenting at Floyd Fest and the country music and all that. That's really amazing. I mean, what's next?
Broadway, baby.
I love it. We got Broadway in Roanoke too. We can do all that. We can do all the things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of not kidding. Sometimes I feel like, we could take this on the road.
You totally could. Don't, because we need you here in Roanoke. But still, the fact is you could. You totally could.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel that way. Like we could just have sort of a package deal and, roll down the highway and, unfurl the circus tents and really, let it all out. That's a dream for sure.
Well, and in thinking about, so you have a wait list, essentially. I mean, you've been selling out overnight. I can barely go get the website locked up before you're sold out tickets, which is a great problem, obviously, to have.
Yes.
And so when you have this wait list and you're thinking about all these people that want to participate, that has led you to now you're growing. You're sort of expanding Hoot Holler into other portions. What does that entail? Because your first show, I believe, is in April of this new piece.
Yes, we have a new offshoot event called the 5-Minute Hootenanny, which is going to be kind of in the vein of a story slam or an open mic, which is supreme surrender on my part. Just P.S. But I'm trying it.
Lee has a very hands-on approach. This is new.
Okay, control issues. Whatever.
I love that the evolution includes you, though. It's not just the event.
Oh yes. It's a package deal, honey.
I love that. And so what do you hope comes out of this new piece of it?
Yeah, so this is going to be a show that'll start immediately after our main show at 9:30 at night, which is crazy.
At night?
I know, right?
Shoot.
I know.
I got to take some coffee then before
I know. And it's going to last for 1 hour only.
Okay.
We're not going to have the bells and whistles of a normal Hoot and Holler. We're just going to bring up the stage lights. We're going to have potential storytellers put their names in a hat to,
all right.
I know,
You're really
for the chance to tell a 5-minute story.
really stretching yourself here.
I know. Believe me, this is way out. Talk about out of your comfort zone. But other city, the Moth even does this with their story slams, and beautiful stuff can come out of this. And my dream and my goal is not only to kind of have an overflow for people who couldn't get in the main show, but also for people who just want to dip their toe into trying it without the intensity of the curated show.
Well, and that's a great seg, because I am curious. You've touched a little bit on what goes on to be a storyteller on your stage. And so let's take, for example, any of the past shows. What does it mean if I, Liz Long, want to come tell a story? I can't just be like, I'm going to tell a story and do it. Like, that's not how any of this works.
Some
Liz.
people think it does, but it's not. No.
It's not how any of this works.
No, the process is one that I've, refined, and it's what works for me as, being the kind of mama bear of this project. So I asked for the story and writing first. You as a writer understand. It's a way for me to gauge if people understand story structure, literally beginning, middle, and an end.
And your times, like, is there a word count or a page limit, or,
It's a 10-minute time limit. A max, for the final product.
Right.
I always tell people to write too much at first, then not enough,
and then whittle it down to what the heart is. Yeah, makes sense.
And so, but really, what I'm looking for is like a strong voice, a strong, conviction and truth, and yes, humor. Even in the dark stuff, there's got to be a little humor.
That's usually where we find it.
Exactly, and especially in front of a live audience. Again, there's a responsibility that I feel as both the walking the fine lines between making sure the audience feels safe and supported and the storytellers feel safe and supported.
You really take on a big responsibility with that.
And I'm sorry that it rained yesterday too. I mean, that's like where like literally.
All right, people pleaser. Calm down. I thought I was a people pleaser.
I know. Do you have a therapy podcast? Because no. Anyway, yes. So I walk all those lines, and I want people to be as vulnerable and authentic and real. But I have to also have a responsibility to the audience. And so,
because some people might go on and on and on, or it goes off on a little tangent that maybe you didn't plan for, kind of. Yeah, that's interesting.
Right. So we work very intensely for, the few weeks leading up to the show. And that consists of me making notes on their, written story and edit suggestions, and pushing them sometimes into the story they're dancing around.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. We did touch on it in our earlier segment, but so for example, and I mentioned this before, but Lindsay McKinnon at our writers conference, she spoke up and shared the fact that she had spoken on the stage before, but when she submitted the story, it was a piece of the story that she told, right? Because you had worked with her to sort of get really to the heart of the story of what she wanted to share.
Right.
And I find that very interesting, not only because of the story midwife, title that you own, but the fact that you have this keen eye to read sort of between the lines of what a person is saying and say, actually, this is where it is. This is where the real story is. Yeah. And I think that's such a fascinating, editorship,
It is, yes.
As an editor, I find that that's such a incredibly crazy talent that you have.
Right. And it's not something I don't think you can really...
Yeah, you can't teach that.
Yeah, it's an instinct.
Yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely.
And some people are more, reticent to go there than others. Others will, say, okay, I'll try it. I'm scared.
Right.
And I say, I'm sure you are, and I'm right here with you.
And Lindsay actually, for all of the work that you guys put into it together, she flat out said, Lee made my story better. It wasn't that my story wasn't good to begin with. It's that she made it better. She made it stronger. She made it resonate better with an audience. So it's interesting that you're thinking about the audience in that way.
Yes.
Because how do you know how they're going to react to something until you're in that moment?
Right.
I mean, how do you read a room and go, uh-oh?
Right. And, as with most story, I mean, Lindsay's for sure, I could give them the whole 2 hours and you wouldn't get the bigger story told, So we really have to pick and choose, those kind of golden nuggets to distill out, that fit the event and fit the theme and fit the time limit. So, most people's lives are not going to fit into a 10-minute.
Right. Well, and that's what's so interesting. You're not telling your life story. You're telling a moment in your life. That's a hugely different thing.
That's right. And sometimes, storytellers who first write don't realize that yet, they will always come to that understanding, but the sort of oh my gosh, I lost my words. The instinct is to write the whole sweeping thing with all the backstory and all the emotions, and that's when that phrase "kill your darlings" comes into play.
Yeah, my favorite, my least favorite phrase.
I know, but really, it's so much about distilling it down for this purpose on this night for this event,
right?
With the understanding that, of course, there's a huger story in there.
Yeah, it's just automatically inferred.
Yeah.
And so, Hoot and Holler, you've had so many, we've talked about a few of the themes, and obviously you've got some really, some themes might be more powerful than fun, right? And so you've got a nice balance of fun versus I'm gonna change your life with this story. You don't know it yet,
right?
But I'm about to change your life. And so I'm curious about if there's been a particularly memorable moment or maybe a transformational experience that you've witnessed on stage. And you don't have to name names, obviously, but if there's a particular moment that sticks out in your mind like that.
Yeah, I mean, right away I can think about our Voices of Veterans event. This was something, I don't come from a military family. It's, of course I understand, but I didn't understand. And so this was a very eye-opening event for me to get to know these families and understand what they've been through and talk about, their PTSD and, these very vulnerable moments in their lives that they...
Very serious topic. I mean, that's not something you make light of in any way.
But there were cheers and laughs and standing ovations. But the one that really stood out for me was a 75-year-old Vietnam vet who had never told even his wife, who he's been married to for 55 years, of some of his experiences. And I did what I do. I did my midwifing and pushed and pushed. He wrote a very surface story. And I said, that's well and good, but we're going deeper. And we sobbed together on the phone multiple times.
That was my question. How, for a 75-year-old man who does not want to talk about his feelings or dig into this really traumatic experience he had, what was that like working with someone who you really had to sort of dig that story out of him?
Yeah. Part of that, a huge part of that is that he was willing to keep letting me push him. There's only so far you can sort of nudge someone.
Right.
He continued to be willing and just open to it. And that's what I tell everybody.
That's so interesting in itself too.
Right.
As an older gentleman who maybe doesn't think he needs to change or, there's no evolution needed kind of thing.
Exactly. But that working with him and that experience was truly so humbling, and to see him absolutely shaking up at that mic. I mean, his voice trembling, his hands trembling, and we had photos of him, projected behind him on the movie screen of, him in uniform, and the conclusions that he came to about lessons learned through his experience in war, and finally admitting there was so much that he was not willing to look at, and so it was really just a beautiful experience for me to be able to be with him as he sort of found his way through that story.
Yeah.
So that's one that really stands out.
It has to, right? I mean, because that's it's an impactful topic. It's not something that's easy for anybody to discuss.
Right.
There's obviously diverse opinions on, all sides of that.
Yeah.
And so I find it fascinating that you're able to bring everyone in a room together to hear his story. And there's no judgment, there's no shaming, there's no it's listening. It's hearing what he had to say and sort of responding to that.
Yeah. And I thought, this is going to be a hard sell. This is not like a night out on the town, like, are these stories going to be too hard?
Yeah.
But the other thing that I do in my curation is find those moments of levity. That's something really important to me. I want the audience to leave the room feeling inspired. I want them to talk about it as soon as they get in their cars or, walk home. I want them to think about their own stories that maybe it triggered in them. And,
right.
But I always want them to feel lifted by the end, and understand that there is hope out there.
Right. And I assume, like, maybe in that particular theme, that you have your own arc of stories that you're figuring out who goes where in what particular time, so that the audience does leave sort of lifted and not necessarily like, oh my gosh,
Yes, there's no hope in the world.
That's a heck of a way to leave people in the room,
Absolutely.
But I think that that's interesting that you're telling the stories and you're making them a story itself.
Yes, I put a ridiculous amount of time into programming the night and writing those waves and finding those moments of levity and being sure to program in time for laughs. It's something I take very seriously, and I spend ridiculous amounts of time.
No, but it shows, obviously. That it shows. And so, and I think what is really most interesting to me in that whole piece of the story that you're sharing is that you yourself are changed.
Yes.
You yourself have been affected by this man's story. Yes. Not only the story itself, but the interaction that you had with him in order to make that happen. And so you really have to be an open heart, an open soul to do that to begin with, just from the get-go. And you're open and you're willing to explore your own opinions about something that maybe you didn't have before that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like I can't ask that of others and not do it myself.
Well,
it's not fair.
Yeah.
It's inauthentic. And so I have to ask that of myself too.
There's ever a word for Lee. It's authentic for sure. Absolutely.
The blessing and the curse of authenticity.
No, it's a wonderful one. And so it's been, again, sort of to see this evolution of Hoot and Holler. And did you ever, when you did the first one, at Sweet Donkey, did you ever say, this is going to be huge, or maybe not in the way that it's going to be huge audience-wise, but
Right. I knew we could keep it going for a little while. I didn't know if it was going to be a sustainable thing, and be able to, now we're going into our 8th year. I think part of what it is too is that I don't do it too often.
Right. You sell it for a reason.
Yeah. I keep people guessing when the next one's going to be, because I myself don't often know. If I did it every 4th Thursday, it would not be, I don't think it would be happening the way it is.
You're not that kind of structure person.
No.
And not to say you weren't structured, but that's the way you operate.
And I need recovery time. It takes a lot out of my heart and soul, and I have to restore myself.
Yeah. And that's not like a weekend of Netflixing.
Right.
You probably need a few weeks to really kind of come back from that. How do you come up with the themes? Like, what do you throw a dart at a board of ideas and just see what sticks? Or I know some of it is like magic time of year. So that was around Halloween, right?
Right. Yes.
But how do you decide veterans? Was that based around Veterans Day?
I saw Veterans Day coming up. Yeah.
That one's kind of easy, but in terms of themes, how do you
keep I keep a hilarious list in my phone. I scribbled on, pieces of paper in my car.
Yeah.
I'll hear a phrase and I'll be like, oh my gosh, what a great theme. And, I'll pull over really fast and write it down. So, but there's really no, unless it is a seasonal thing, like spooky stories for Halloween or whatever.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's really kind of something that will bubble up for me. It's sort of an instinct.
I was going to say, it must be like, as a writer, when you write something and you just know it works. You just know it's good, like in your heart. Yeah. And that's, I guess that's how it works for you. I just know this is going to work.
Yeah. Our last show was the Body Show, or the Everybody Show. And that we did that right around Valentine's Day. Right. And so my initial thinking to myself was, I should do like a Twisted Valentine's or love stories, or,
which would still do well.
Sure, exactly. Of course. But this, for whatever reason, that theme just continued to sort of fight its way to the top. And I was like, okay, I'm going with this. And huge. We had more submissions than we've ever had for that.
Well, that's another good question. I expect that the submissions have gotten greater each time with each event. Now you're not getting 5, you're getting 25 or whatever.
Right.
how do you even curate like the first layer of submissions where you're like, this one might work, this one probably won't work.
Right.
I mean, and again, nothing's ever personal. It's not about the writer. It's the story that they're sharing. But like, how do you curate?
It's hard. I mean, again, I feel responsible for everybody, and I never want to say this story,
Yeah, really.
I never want to say no.
How do you as a people pleaser?
Yes.
do
and
this?
So I really just, it's like an instinct. And I start to feel the way the night can feel if I place these 8 stories together. And again, that riding the waves of emotion and the levity and the humor and not having something too similar to another one. And so it's just this kind of inherent, like, here's my 8 people for the night. Yeah, I mean, it's just this weird, like, spooky, sixth sense. No, these are the ones that are going to make it.
I think writers understand completely what you're saying, and it's sort of again, we talked about from page to stage and your sort of career starting in Hollywood, and you've really been you've been storytelling for your whole life.
That's right.
I mean, so to some degree, it's experience. It's following your gut instinct because in the past it's worked out for you. Yeah. But your experience in Hollywood has led you to this moment. That's just the coolest thing ever, that you're able to say, I understand how the industry works, and I was able to bring it back to my industry, whatever that means for you. So that's just like the neatest thing ever. How do you 8 stories out of probably 1,000 submissions? I mean, that's really tough.
Yeah.
Really tough.
Then there's some themes where, I know there's something missing, so I'll throw it out on Facebook.
That's interesting.
Like, has anyone here, had all of your teeth pulled, or whatever it is, there'll be something that I know is missing, even though I might have enough submissions and I could make it work, but there's like a voice that I know needs to be in there. And so I'll kind of throw out like a casting call and, tag somebody here, or throw me a name, send me a message. And that's quite often how I've gotten people who might not even know what Hoot and Holler is, or who are looking for that personal invitation. Well,
and I think that's interesting too, the personal invitation, because how do you work with people who are hesitant to get on stage?
Yeah.
I mean, truly, like we're joking about public speaking consultant, but like, how do you help this man who's shaking at the mic to do the work?
Yeah. So much of it is, again, getting that story in a good shape in writing, where they feel like they're telling the story that they're ready to tell.
Yeah.
And really encouraging them in that way. And then we talk about it on the phone. I have them read it to me, and I just listen, and I'll make notes. And then I'll say, this part really jumped out at me, or this feels confusing, or who was that uncle, and so we just continue to refine together until it comes to a place for them, ideally, where in writing it feels like this is me speaking my truth in a very authentic way. And then we work.
Just practice.
Yeah.
I mean kind of like a play, right?
Very much.
You're got to repeat the lines and make sure.
Do it in the shower while you're walking your dog.
Do you, do they have a script on hand? I know you don't love to have the lines in front of you.
Right.
You want to be authentic and to kind of storytell without the paperwork.
I also don't want people to feel thrown to the wolves. So I am... we do have a music stand up on the stage where I do let people have notes. Of course, I don't want anybody holding up a piece of paper in front of their face. The whole, again, that word magic, magic happens when the audience can see, the storyteller's eyes and their expressions, and where they can really feel connected in that way. So we do one rehearsal.
That's it
only, where everybody gets together.
Shoo.
Yeah. I mean, again, there's been up to that point several phone calls.
Sure. But still, you've got all your Broadway actors on now.
Totally.
It's time to put them together.
Yeah. And that can be an intense night of sort of, we ride the waves of all the emotions. Like, I'm not worthy to be in the show, all the way to like, this is going to be the best thing ever.
Oh my God. So you're also part therapist.
Beyond.
Yeah, beyond.
I mean, my psychology minor is in full effect. Oh my
Sorry,
gosh.
I'm laughing too hard to keep going.
No, I mean, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, you're dealing with a lot of emotions.
So much.
Not all of them are positive just because they're nervous or worried or scared, like it's a big deal to get in front of a stage. Like not everybody can do it.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that's okay. It's not
And some of the people who have doubted, who have been like, okay, this is going to be, maybe the weaker story in the night, but it's still so worthy of being told, and maybe this person is not going to be as dynamic as this hilarious person or this amazing person who's already published 4 books or whatever. And so often, though, what I find is they get up there and they just feel the energy in the room and they find their footing and they steady their voice and they blow it out of the water. I've seen it over and over again.
That's so interesting that, you could be shaking in your boots, and then suddenly you get up there. But again, that's because of the inclusive audience that you've sort of brought into the room. That it's a safe space no matter what story you're sharing. I mean, that's really key. Truthfully, is knowing that my audience isn't going to laugh and throw popcorn at me. They laugh, hopefully, because that's the goal of my story every time. But, at the same time, it's it's a vulnerable position to be in.
It is. And I set that up immediately, in my introduction. I just say, this is a container of love. Set the precedent. Absolutely. And nothing else is going to be welcome here.
I
mean,
we don't got time for jerks.
I just ask you to keep your heart open. Whether or not you agree, whether or not this is your experience.
Right. And you've had some really, truly amazing stories come out of that. And I think the other thing is the ripple effect, right? So what we've been talking about with Hoot and Holler is what's on stage, what's in front of us, what the stories that are being told. What you don't see, you probably see it on Facebook, but what you don't see are the audience members discussing those stories and then suddenly feeling vulnerable enough to share their stories with the person next to them. And it's just that ripple effect throughout the community that's going to be felt because everybody's suddenly inspired and motivated to be part of this thing, this great big, we've all got this in common kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. I mean, my favorite day, aside from the show day, which is always a blur, but my favorite day is the next day when I'm just on the couch like a zombie and going through messages and seeing the photos and getting the messages of people. This was my first time and now I'm hooked forever. And now I want to, I heard you say what the next theme is and I'm sending something in. They get inspired from being in the room. And that's, people have said, will you do a live stream or, to include more
I bet
people?
You do get a lot of that question.
And I'm considering it because I never want to turn anybody away, but it's so electric in the room, in the space.
The experience is something that you can't really replicate.
Right.
Yeah. Well, in terms of, so you had mentioned occasionally you get phone calls or people reaching out. How do I be part of this? How do I do this? Do you get people from other areas now reaching out? How do I start my own Hoot and Holler kind of thing?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, and I'm generous.
I know you don't want to give away all the goods.
No, I am generous. Again, I did not invent this. I am not the boss of storytelling.
You don't take full claim for this?
I don't. But I do feel sort of proprietary in how hard I've worked to get here. Yeah. And so, but really and truly my advice to people is if it's something, that you believe in, find a space, get a community behind you, get some people who could tell the stories and make a Facebook page. I mean, literally that's where I started. But it has so much to do with believing in it yourself.
I mean, I think there's copying the event and then there's having you at the event. It's not the same thing.
Right.
You can have 8 people come up there and tell stories, but that doesn't mean it's going to be Hoot and Holler. And so you can do it. We always encourage everyone to share their stories.
Absolutely.
But you're putting so much of your heart and soul into every single story, and that personal touch that you're really putting into that's what makes it stand out. It's not just the storytelling event itself. Right. It's Lee Hunsaker's heart and soul is what it is. It's truly
on full display.
I mean, the best way to be. Come on. I mean, look at us. We're wearing sparkles for God's sake. Like, who doesn't want to hang out? And so I love the aspect that you're creating a community here. Because did you ever think this is what it's going to be? I mean, I know we've kind of brushed on that, but there's no way you could have said we're going to have packed out houses for the next 8 years.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I couldn't have invented this. I couldn't have dreamed it.
Yeah.
And yet it feels exactly right, at the same time.
Yeah, you're where you're meant to be at this point in time in your life.
But if someone, 10 years ago had said, where do you want to be in 10 years? This would not have been on the bingo card.
Right.
And what would my life be without it?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Empty.
No, you'd fill it with something.
I might
surely.
fill it with something.
You'd
but
fill it with something wonderful.
This feels like the thing.
Yeah, but I'm so glad you choose Hoot and Holler to be part of that. Well, thank you. I know that we need to wrap up here, listeners.
Yes.
Is there anything else? Hoot and Holler, where can listeners learn more about that? I know you mentioned Facebook page.
Yes, Facebook page is Hoot and Holler Stories, also on Instagram.
Okay.
Several of our shows are available to view on the PBS Echo.
Ooh, I didn't know
Blue Ridge
that.
PBS
Shoot.
Echo YouTube channel.
Okay.
They are forever preserved.
All right, we'll link that. That's cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
And so they come and record as many of our shows as they can.
Awesome.
And then they edit them and they put them online.
That's
for
great.
us.
Well,
So-
if you can't make it in the room, then you got another opportunity to catch some of it there.
Exactly.
Maybe not quite as electrifying, but still
Right,
pretty darn good.
Exactly. You can definitely get a taste of,
Yeah.
of the beauty and the magic.
Yeah, and then plenty of events to come. I mean, throughout the year, you've already,
Yes.
like you said, you've announced this sort of mini one in April.
Yes, 5-minute Hootenanny.
5-minute Hootenanny,
Yes.
which I love the title. I love the logo.
Yeah.
It's great.
And that's just going to be, I hope, rowdy and yet another kind of, I think it's going to be rowdy, but yet another inclusive platform for people to come and take it, dip a toe.
Yeah.
Dip a toe.
I love that, though, because a lot of people are probably very curious about it, but they don't
Yes.
necessarily. I mean, it sounds like a pretty big commitment if you're in the show. So this is a great way, an opportunity. Another wonderful, inclusive opportunity to be part of something
hope
bigger than
so.
yourself.
Yeah, I'm excited about that.
That's great. Lee Hunsaker, Hoot and Holler, fame, March, April cover star of the Roanoker, all the good things. Thank you so much for the special bonus episode, for being on here. Assuming I can ever get tickets, I can't wait to come to another Hoot and Holler. I got to be on a wait
I know
list.
people.
Well, you know. If I got to beg, I'll beg. I don't care. Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank
again
you for
being on our show.
having me.
Appreciate
What an
it.
honor. Thank
Yes.
you so
Can't wait to see all our listeners at the next Hoot and Holler. It's going to be great. Awesome. Thank you so much, listeners. You can, of course, catch more. We'll share some of those links to Hoot and Holler and plenty more to come. So please be sure to check out our website over at theroanoker.com and read the glorious, wonderful life that is Lee Hunsaker in our March, April feature written by Ashley Wilson Fellers. Thank you so much for being on here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.